super cool to see, since I graduated from the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, which is Mark David's program in Boulder, what a huge variety of teachers and coaches I meet and see on the internet. And some who are amazing and some whose approaches I don't care for or resonate with, which is fine. There are so many people, so many coaches because there are so many people, and our uniqueness is amazing. But everybody has their own focus, whether it be on weight loss or intuitive eating or emotional eating. But today's guest is somebody who feels like a true sister in this eating psychology coach community. Our perspectives are so similar, but of course she has plenty to share that I don't. And I'm thrilled to share her no nonsense, but super warm and loving approach to binge eating disorder with you here today. And if you've listened to a few episodes, you'll know that I always tie things up with the question, what is your definition of a free spirit? And while I loved Melissa's answer, we got to messaging about it later, and she added this. She said, if I could go back and say, kind of give myself another moment to think about it, I'd say that a free spirit to me symbolizes going back to our child selves. Children are explorers, curious observers, wanderers. They have no judgments. They see everything through fresh eyes and are amazed by everything and anything. They're completely uninhibited, unafraid to speak their minds, and unfazed by what other people are doing or saying about them. And this is what it means to me to be a free spirit, revisiting the place within us, the person we were as children before the world told us how to be. So in today's episode, we'll talk about the comments that people, and most often I feel like women, get on weight loss, especially even when that weight loss is because we're sick on some level, whether it's emotionally or physically, and how those sorts of comments can affect our relationship with our bodies. We'll talk about what happens when you stop the bulimic behaviors, if that's what you are struggling with, and are just left with the binge eating. Why it doesn't help to count days binge-free or to keep trying to start over, get that fresh start. Why just halting the binge eating isn't necessarily the primary goal. Why we don't have a death wish out on our inner critics, and this was both of us agreeing on this, and what approach we take instead. How to balance the sort of analyzing, journaling side of the healing journey with just learning to sit and feel. Why intuitive eating is, as Melissa says, an adult's game, and very practically how to begin addressing overeating, compulsive eating, or binge eating. I hope you enjoy this episode with Melissa Riccardi. There was something you wrote once that popped out at me, and I actually wrote it down, and it was not because it was necessarily a new thing or a new idea, but because you just put it so succinctly. It was just a 2-sentence post. You said, binge eating has more to do with what you're not feeling than what you're eating. Food is the distraction. Feelings are the lottery ticket. And for someone who is absolutely certain they're just a food addict or that their issue is willpower, that's either going to be a huge revelation or it's going to sound like nothing, like gobbledygook, like they won't even hear it. So I want to know, first of all, from your personal experience and your journey, how did you realize that just trying to control the food wasn't your answer and that it was going to be more about learning how to feel? What was your process?
Yes. So for me to have that revelation, it took a very long time for me to be able to come to that conclusion, because so often with the media out there, they tell you do this and your self-esteem will go up or your confidence will go up and all of these things will change internally. And while it does maybe temporarily, while I would change my diet or change the way that I thought about food or eat healthier, it never really changed my confidence or my self-esteem. And what really did that was finding a mentor that I mentored under for 3 years. And he basically taught me how to feel my feelings that I had no idea were even there because I numbed them out for so long.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's really important that you said the amount of time, because I think that we tend to think that there's going to be like one fix, like I'm going to find that one tip in a magazine or I'm going to read this one book and that is going to be my answer and I'm just going to be done. Like I'm going to find it and it's all going to click, but it's a process. And it's sometimes like hearing something, because we do even hear this, like you need to feel your feelings, but at first you usually don't know what that means. And then sometimes you have to really sit down with somebody who's been through it so that they
Yeah.
can walk you through the process. What was your, like, when did you first start struggling with food, or was it body image first and then food? Like, what was the first memory you have of food and body being a painful issue for you?
Yeah, yeah. So the first thing that I can remember is when I was in primary school as a little girl. I was probably in about grade 4 or 5, and I remember walking down the street, and this boy, which was probably a couple of years older than me, I had walked past, and he called me a pig. And it really, like, you can imagine at that age, it just completely shattered me, like, to the deepest level. And I can relate to that little girl now and how sad she was. You know, at the time I was very shattered, but I kind of didn't know what to do with those feelings. And I thought that it was my fault that I looked like that. And I wasn't even overweight at the time. Maybe I was a little bit, chubby at that age, but it wasn't anything, too drastic. I wasn't obese or anything like that. I was a normal looking girl. But to me, I felt like the outsider at that time. And I felt like I should feel guilty for looking like this. And the message that I got from that was that I needed to change the way I looked to fit in with other people so they would accept me, so that I could be worthy of their friendship or their love. And that, it really shook me. And I remember that distinctly, that moment.
Well, and it's just really interesting because I feel like that moment would not have been so potent if we weren't already steeped in a culture that says, you need to look a certain way to be acceptable. Like, there was so much leading up to set you up for that being such a painful turning point.
Yeah, exactly. In primary school, it's all about, and in high school, it's all about, getting the boys' attention and who looks the most girlish, who looks the prettiest, and who develops quickest. And I developed quite quickly when I was younger too, so I didn't know what to do with that. My boobs grew quite large earlier on, and I didn't really know how to connect with that because a lot of the girls hadn't developed that quickly. And I felt like I didn't feel in my body, and I didn't feel accepting of my body because other people didn't accept it. So I didn't think that it should be accepted as it was.
That's interesting that you say that now. Like, I didn't feel in my body, but at that time, was that even a concept for you, or you just sort of look back and you're like, wow, I was totally disconnected?
Yeah, no, looking back now, at that time, I thought that I probably was connected and I was just doing what everyone else was doing. And I thought that's just what it meant to be, in your body, just looking the best physically and not looking internally at yourself, regardless of what other people think.
Right. Like, making that shift and realizing, like, oh, I haven't been in my body. I've been thinking about my body constantly. So
Yeah, exactly.
realizing what that shift actually is a huge game changer. So from that point, when did you start, or did you start dieting or altering your food in some way, or going into disordered eating?
Absolutely. So I would say I spent a lot of time, maybe, because I used to go to my Italian grandma's house after school each day, and she'd always have pasta and chicken schnitzel. And, I would start to gradually decrease the amount of food that I was eating there, and I would be more cautious of the portion sizes that I was having. So I did find myself after that moment, years on, gradually getting more and more diet obsessed and more and more cautious about what I was putting in my body, but not in a healthy way, in an unhealthy way. And so my portion sizes would reduce, and, Italian grandmas, they're like, why you not eat? Why you not eat? Like, and my body would gradually, it was getting skinnier and skinnier, but people were actually praising me for that.
Of course, yeah.
But really, it wasn't, looking back now, it wasn't anything to be praised for. And that's what I like, a lot of people look at skinny people or thinner people, naturally or unnaturally, and they think that that is the healthy way, or that they look healthy, or they say, oh, you've lost a lot of weight, you look so healthy. But it's not necessarily the case. And that's something that I really, teach all my clients, and that I love to talk about because it's super important. It's like, for example, when you're sick, or, I had food poisoning a couple of months ago, and people would say, oh, you look great. But I had just literally had food poisoning. I was not in my best shape at all.
Right. Well, there's this simple idea that thin equals good, or in so many ways, like morally better. Like, you are better because this certain look is so prized. And so we don't look at all of the things that could have potentially led to that thinness. Like you're saying, like sickness or disorder, or, maybe you went through a breakup and you just couldn't eat and suddenly you're getting praised from that. And that can really mess with your head, especially as a young woman.
Yeah. Especially as a little girl. I mean, it really messes with your mind. You're like, okay, I'm getting praised for this, so I must be doing something right here.
Yes.
So I should keep restricting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how long did that last? And did it immediately lead to binge eating or emotional eating, or was that years down the line?
So I continued on with the restriction up until I lost a bunch of weight. I didn't really find that I lost too much weight in primary school, but it was more high school that I started restricting more and more. And I restricted to the point where I was getting a lot of attention, but I was restricting so much that one night I remember it was around probably 10, 11 o'clock, and I went into the lounge room. I went into the kitchen and I just stuffed myself full of like a box of shapes. And I'm like, what the hell? Because before that I had eaten so healthy for years and I had no inkling to eat unhealthily, or in my mind it was unhealthy food. I had stuck with chicken and salad and what I classified as healthy. And then all of a sudden one night I had this massive urge to go into the kitchen and just, stuff my face. It was completely like unconscious. And I remember sitting in the lounge room. It was completely pitch black, and I threw up my food. And that was the first time that I had developed bulimia. And I didn't know what I was doing. It was completely unconscious, but it was what was going on in my mind at the time. And that's when my bulimia started. So I had bulimia before I had binge eating disorder.
Wow. So had you heard of people doing that before? Like people throwing up their food, or did you just sort of get to the end of it and you're like, wow, what did I do? Like at what point did that make sense in your mind at the time?
All I was thinking at the time was that I had done something wrong by eating all of this food. And I thought I was scared that I was going to put on weight by it, because I had spent all this time trying to get into this gorgeous body, or what I thought was gorgeous, because I was getting all this attention, and I was so scared of losing that my first thought was just to throw it all up. I didn't really process or was conscious of anything. But then afterwards, I remember I was so numb to it. After that, I didn't even think it was bad or good. I just thought it was the thing to do, if that makes sense. And then I had continued that so I started that at about 15 years old, 16, and I continued that for a few years, up till about 22 years old. And my mum knew about it also, but she didn't really, she mentioned it to me, but she didn't really know what to do about it. As a parent, I can understand it's a bit difficult because you don't know how to handle the situation. But then I ended up stopping it on my own when I was 22 because I was scared of the repercussions. I did also have health anxiety at the time, and I was more scared of the repercussions health-wise. So I stopped it on my own, which is uncommon. Not a lot of people do. So I am grateful for that. But after I did stop it, I still had the binge eating portion of bulimia. So I was eating a bunch of food, just not throwing it up.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that common in the people that you work with, that maybe will transition, whether with help or not with help, from bulimia to binge eating, rather than just working with the bulimia and then they're done?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it depends what kind of internal work you do on yourself. But I feel like there is a process where you jump from, there's various steps to recovery. And I think one of those steps is bulimia, and then binge eating will show up on occasion. And then overeating, I feel like, is the final straw, where you're more conscious of what you're doing, but you still continue to do it anyway.
Right. And I think it's really important, especially as we're working with people, to really note that as progress. I think we can be so hard on ourselves and like, oh my God, I still do this thing and I'm not healed, blah, 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 blah. But if we can really just infuse so much lightness to it, and anything that we're doing that is a step forward is such a big deal.
Absolutely.
Huge deal.
Totally. And we need to go back sometimes. I mean, a lot of my clients, like you said, they beat themselves up for, I haven't binged in 2-3 weeks, and then all of a sudden, like, I was going strong and now I've taken a step back. But I don't really call it a step back. I call it a point where you have a new awareness, because who you were 2-3 weeks ago is still not who you are now. It's still different, and you can look back on that and see how different you are now and how you're handling it now compared to before, even 2-3 weeks ago.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. It's never a step backwards. And it's also, it's a step forwards in when you can get to the point. And I love seeing people get to this point when they can go that period of time, the 2 to 3 weeks or whatever, and then have a binge and be like, oh, wow, look at those 2 to 3 weeks that I had. And now this has come up again. What is this telling me?
Yes, and absolutely. And when my client, I love to invite and invoke curiosity to binge eating, and just ask. I love when my clients get to a place where it's more about curiosity as opposed to judgment of the self, where it's more coming from a place of, I binge, like I feel like binging right now, or even after, during, or after a binge, you're like, okay, just doesn't feel good. Something, I don't know why I binged, but obviously I did it for a reason. I'm just going to check in with myself. And so I suppose the whole gist of it is I feel like progress isn't that you're not binge eating. Progress is that you're becoming more conscious.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And
you're turning, yeah. So you're turning,
like we want to hold on to this beating ourselves up because we think that's what's going to get us to the not binge eating, which we think is what the goal is.
Yes. It's so hard to break that pattern, and I completely understand. Like, I was like that for many, many years, where I was beating myself up, frustrated, even in the intuitive stage too. It's so easy because you have black and white thinking when you have disordered eating. So stepping out of that, it can be challenging for sure to allow for the gray areas.
Right. And because in that black and white thinking, we think that the goal is, I never binge again. Or I see this a lot in like the binge eating community groups on Facebook, where they're like, okay, I've done 21 days not binging. But then if they mess up one day, if they mess up their sleep, everything is lost. Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's no celebration. And I don't know, what do you think of that? When, because I used to do this too. And I don't know if you did, but counting, like, I'm going to go for this many days without binging.
Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't do that, but I do see a lot of people, and I actually wrote a blog post about this, and I don't like it for the reason that you're not giving yourself the small wins of all those times that you didn't binge, because you're, okay, I'm starting from scratch, so day one. But what about all those days that you didn't binge and what you learned from the times that you did binge in that time? Like, this is life now, and it's not day one tomorrow. This is life right now. So I don't feel like, we're not starting a new life. This is part of our journey.
Yes. The starting over thing too is that very black and white mindset. And we want that, right? Like, it feels really good to have that fresh start. Like, now things are going to be perfect. Now, and there's so many fresh starts. Like, if we look back and think like, well, how many times have I said this? How many times have I said, this is my fresh start? This is my new hope. I'm going to be good from here on out. And then if you're not 100%, then it's like, again, like it's all lost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember you talking about why we might not want to get rid of binge eating 100%, or why, like, that's not the goal.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so passionate about this. So in terms of not wanting to let go of binge eating 100% or wanting to recover 100%, what I mean by that is binge eating is always a sign that we need to look into something deeper within ourselves. And what a beautiful thing that we have something external that is inviting us to go within. Some people aren't conscious of that, or, there's all these things that show up in their lives, but they're not conscious of it. But this binge eating, we know that it's something that is uncomfortable for us, and it's something that may frustrate us. But it's also a sign that, okay, the binge eating's back. This must mean something's going on internally. And I love that it's an indication and a sign that comes up to say, okay, time to look at this. Like, I thought my life was going, that I was sorting things out, that I was, doing the work on myself, but clearly something here is telling me to go inside. And I always think of it as that binge eating is always a sign to go inside and see what's going on. Doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just a signal, a sign to go inside the self.
And I think that, I think there are so many ways that we need to redefine recovery, because that in itself isn't a step backwards. It's often, I think, like getting to a deeper layer. Like, we've done all of this understanding work and feeling work, and maybe you get to a point where you're not overeating or binge eating or eating compulsively for a long period, and then it comes up again, and maybe it's just that you've hit a new layer of something that is asking to be felt and asking to be understood. Not a backward step, just to like, this is your thing. Like, we all have a thing that tells us, oh, hey, like, you're checking out, or you're not connected to your body, or life is asking you to look at something. Your body is asking you to look at something. And this is the only thing that will get your attention, because it's a painful thing. And there probably were, and I think that we learn this as we go, little signs leading up to that we're saying, like, hey, look inwards, feel, drop in. And hey, if you're not noticing those, then binge eating comes in as a support. Or just, I think too, and what I've noticed in my own journey, that it's not, because I think this can really scare people to think, like, what do you mean I'm going to be a binge eater for the rest of my life? Like, that's, I don't think what we're saying, but compulsive eating or overeating, or just like checking out when you're eating, is just a little like wake up call at some point. Like, this is just your thing, your life, your body's way of saying, like, hey, go back in, connect back in, come back home, essentially.
Exactly. And I would say, a lot of people are scared of the weight gain or gaining weight, but I would say that that's another way that if weight is really important to you in your life and you're scared of gaining weight, then that weight is a way for something inside of you trying to get your attention, because it's the only way that it knows. Because with females, what better way to get your attention, this part of you, than to have you put on weight? Then you have to look at what's going on, right?
Yes. What do you say to somebody who is having a hard time looking at that as a positive thing? Because we really could look at all of this, and I think it supports us to look at all of this as supportive to us. So the weight as a supportive, positive message, the compulsive overeating as a supportive, positive message. How do you work with somebody that's really having a hard time seeing the positivity in that?
Yeah, it's difficult because, first of all, I would say we need to acknowledge that the weight is uncomfortable for us at the moment. So start with whatever you're feeling about it. You don't have to be okay with it. You just start with where you're at.
Yes.
Yeah, don't pretend that you're happy about it. Don't pretend to love your body if you don't. Just admit, like, hey, right now I've put on 20 pounds. I'm super uncomfortable in my body right now. And have that be okay on some level. And that's your starting point.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Because I realized as I was saying this, like, positive, I say the word positive, and I'm not a huge fan of the whole positive thinking thing, because I think that's sort of just like a pretty gloss we put over things, and we're like, look, I'm being good, I'm being a positive thinker. And I think that goes back to just this black and white, good, bad, right, wrong way of being. And I don't think it's useful just to be like, everything is positive and everything is good. But if we can just, I think the positivity is simply settling in, like you said, and just being like, okay, what's here? I'm really not liking this situation, and I'm going to settle into that.
Yeah. So my second step would be, there's obviously a part of you that has put on the weight. Like, I like to think in terms of, there's different parts of us. So we have an angry part, sad part, frustrated part, and this is all metaphoric, of course. And all these parts serve a purpose in our lives, and they are always there to protect us, or they really want the best for us, and they're doing the best they can in order to help us meet certain needs. And so I would say there's a part of you that's put on the weight, and then there's a part of you that is frustrated by the weight. So what I like to do is have those parts speak up and go inside and say, okay, frustrated part, like, what's going on? Or the part of you that's put on weight, like, how come? What's going on? And treat them like children, like inner children, that we're trying to listen to both sides and negotiate. First of all, figure out what both those needs are. And you'll notice that usually two opposing parts of us, they're actually wanting to get the same need met, just in different ways. Whether it be, for example, attention, like, oh, you're not giving me attention, so I've put on the weight. And then the frustrated part wants attention too, and it thinks that the way to get attention is to be skinny. And that's why it's frustrated at this part that's put on weight. So we want to negotiate with the parts and be like, okay, you want this, and then this part wants this. So how can we work together so that Mel, for example, is the best version of her? And you want to just basically listen to the different opposing parts and, just really acknowledge the parts of you that feel different ways, and try and find some camaraderie and connection there. And then the feelings themselves will process, and you'll be able to find a conclusion there that helps, and you can see what's going on there. And then you can get into a place, if you want to shape shift the body, it becomes easier because the parts are working together now, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally does. And I love it because it's like you're not making any part of yourself wrong.
No, like I hate when I really dislike people that promote, just tell the inner critic to go away, or I'm like, no, obviously there's a part of you that needs your attention. Why are you telling it to go away? Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, I know. No, I'm so with you on that. Or like they'll call it their inner gremlin or their inner demon or any of these things, or they just like tell it to shut up. Like I feel like there's this one book that my clients will bring up a lot, and I probably shouldn't even try and think of the name because let's just not go there, I guess. But I don't know, like they call this their inner binge eater, something awful, like the monster or something. It's much more harsh than that. But I remember the first time somebody brought that up to me and I was like, oh my God, so harsh. Not only do we not need to do that, it's really not actually helpful.
No, it's not. I mean, would you say that to a child? Would you say that to your own child? No, of course not.
Yeah. So I love this, working with the different parts of you. How do you balance this sort of analyzing, thinking, maybe journaling, picking all of these parts of us apart side of it with the simple, just feeling, sensation side of things? Because I think that it's very, we like to go into analysis. It gives us a sense of control, but we don't often like to go into just like being and feeling.
Yeah. And that's the hardest part, I think, because logically to understand what's going on for you, I feel like people are awesome at doing that. People know why they binge. Like either it's because they're lonely. Most of the time you know why, or at least, a particular layer as to why. But getting into the emotions and the feeling is super challenging, and I totally get it because even me, I've done it for years and it still is uncomfortable. And the point isn't that it's not going to be uncomfortable, because it is. There's a part of you that is pain. Like your body doesn't want to experience pain. So of course it's going to try and, distract you by using food or coping mechanisms and distract you from the pain. So to go into the pain is uncomfortable. So first recognizing that and accepting that, and recognizing how we distract ourselves from feeling. And the second step is, in terms of doing the work, or what I call the work, so it is looking at these parts. And for example, if I was to do the work on myself, I would go into a set of questions that get me deeper and deeper into the core beliefs of myself. So if I was overeating, I'd be like, hey, like, what's going on with you right now? And then this part would communicate back. And this part is more subconscious. So if I was to, and this can be a little bit challenging initially because a lot of the time we'll still use our logical minds as opposed to our feelings. So it is helpful to work with a coach in this. But my first step, if people find it challenging to connect with their feelings, I simply just have them put their hands on their heart area and just like close their eyes and just breathe. Take a deep breath and just get into the feeling body and just connect with their bodies again and just tell me what they're feeling, like the first thing that comes to mind. And even the emotional language is challenging if you haven't been taught this skill. And it is a skill. Emotions and feeling and emotional language is a skill if you haven't been taught it when we were younger, which a lot of us haven't. So what I like to do is have like a feelings list that I give my clients usually. And it's just a bunch of feelings, and they simply have to pick one that they can relate to in that moment. And sometimes I'll have them set timers on their phones for like every hour. And every hour they'll go within, they'll close their eyes and they'll be like, oh, or maybe they'll know exactly what they're feeling. Like if they're in a meeting or something and they feel angry, usually those predominant emotions you can feel straight away. But what that does is it gets you to subtly feel every hour more and more as you practice what you're feeling. And it's easier if you can just have a list, because the inner child likes to have, it helps if there's something in front of it, it can just point to whatever feeling it's feeling.
Oh, I really like that. I love how concrete and practical that is. Do you find that people get tired doing that? Because I see that a lot where it's like actually feeling for the first time, if it's the first time for somebody, is kind of exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like, it's because you're using your brain, right? And especially emotionally, if we haven't used that muscle before, then it can become draining quite quickly. And I know when I work on myself, if I work on myself like into a deep core feeling that I've been feeling, then yeah, I'll like fall asleep after it. So it's totally normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
It means that things are going on in the brain also. New circuits are being connected, new beliefs. Yeah, so it's awesome. It's a really good sign that things are shifting for you in your brain.
I think that's important to say too, that like something is actually happening here, because I think that it's easy to say, well, just sitting and feeling and being, I'm not doing anything. And so we feel like we're not working hard enough, or then to fall asleep or to feel tired, we think that we're weak. Like we're just so used to beating ourselves up because we think that's the only way we're going to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the way that that my mentor taught me that that there's a shift happening is when when you're there for yourself and you meet your own need. Like for example, if a part of you wants attention, then I'll say, oh, like, how can I give you attention? What is it that you need from me? And it can be like, oh, I need a hug. So then I metaphorically give myself a hug, and I imagine like my big arms cradling the little girl in me. Or maybe sometimes I'll physically do it with my arms and I'll just hug myself. Or also it helps maybe to have a teddy or something that you can hold in front of you, and that you can communicate to and pretend that that's your inner child. And then you can turn it around and hug her. So it's something physical, because sometimes people aren't the best with using their imagination. They're more tactile and they need something to hold. So sometimes that can help also. But yeah, when that need is met, you'll notice a slight shift in your emotions, and you'll notice that when that need is being met, that you feel much better, and there's that shift there. You go from feeling maybe frustrated that the inner child was feeling before to now feeling held and safe. Yeah, that's how you notice.
I love that because it actually gets you into your own experience. So it's not like this list of like, this is what you do when you love yourself. You should take a bath or go for a walk or do this or this or this. It's actually like, okay, I have to feel my own pain, my little part of me that's hurting, and ask her what she needs.
Yes, we have to be parents to our inner child. It's only us that can do that. It's like our own parents. Like no one else can parent us better than our parents, right? No one else can be there for us better than we can ourselves. And it's all about taking responsibility for our own feelings, for our own selves. And unfortunately, as uncomfortable as it is some of the time, no one else can make us feel as good as we can ourselves.
Right. Absolutely. And I was thinking about this earlier too, because one of the first pieces that we touched on was just this embodiment, this being in the body rather than constantly thinking about the body. And we're talking about healthy versus unhealthy foods. And that is so different when we're living in our heads and we have an idea of like, okay, this is healthy, so this should work, versus actually living inside your body and saying like, okay, this is what I think works, or this is what I think is healthy. Let me try this on and experiment and see like what actually is health supporting for my body. So tell me about embodied eating, intuitive eating, and how that ties into binge eating, how that ties into health on every level from your perspective.
Yeah, so intuitive eating is, I would say, an adult's game, in that it's hard to do intuitive eating when you are not living in your body. So intuitive eating is quite an advanced thing to do, in that it takes a while to actually tune into your body wisdom, because we've lived so long not being in our bodies. So there is quite a process involved there to get back into our bodies, because first of all, there's feelings that don't want to be felt. So that's the first step, just taking a breath into the body and continually going, instead of checking out, continually trying to check in with the self. And I think that's really important. But intuitive eating is, I would say, a kind of meditation for people. When you going from being disconnected to connected again, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's not always comfortable, in that you're feeling feelings that are uncomfortable, like I said. But everything is a meditation. When you turn into the self, it's always going to lead you to the truth.
Yes. And it's interesting too that you said when we're practicing being connected or connected again, I think that a lot of us maybe have never been connected. So it's particularly challenging to figure out, oh, what does that even feel like?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I love using the breath, because it gets you into the body straight away, a deep breath. Like I always say the breath never lies. Like the breath always puts you into the present moment without any beliefs, without any, any toxic beliefs that you have about yourself or presumptions that you have. It just brings you into the present moment.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's where we need to continue coming back to, because like you're saying over and over again, this takes so much time. I think there's this idea that, like we switch from diet to diet. Like, okay, I'm doing this diet and this is how it works, and I'm just going to do this. Then we go into intuitive eating and we bring so much of our diet mentality into that. And we think like, okay, well now I'm an intuitive eater, so now I should just be good at this. But it takes so much time. And there's so much with the feeling your feelings, or the, like, you know, if your inner child or some part of you asks for a hug and you give yourself a hug, that's a practice. Like it's a practice learning how to ask. It's a practice learning how to hear. It's a practice learning how to hold yourself if that's what you need. So it might not even work at first. Like a lot of this stuff might not feel like it works at first. There's so many layers, and it takes so much practice and dedication to yourself.
Absolutely. And also just patience with yourself, because there's obviously ways that you get your need met currently that aren't healthy, be it like food or other people. And I think that it's important to have that crutch there, because that currently, and this is like my favorite thing to talk about, but the binge eating crutch or using food, I never want to take that away from people, because that has helped you up until this point to protect you in some way. So I never want to take that away. What I want to do is introduce new tools so that people are able to see slowly that part of you is able to trust that you're going to be there for it in a way where it doesn't need to use food anymore.
Yes. So practically, what does that look like? Like, so somebody is binge eating. They just want to get rid of the binge eating. They're asking you, how do I get rid of this thing? How do you transition them? How do you introduce this idea?
So I would get them to, it's difficult because if you're just bringing more consciousness into the situation, so it can be, and it doesn't matter where in the process you're bringing more consciousness. So sometimes initially you may not bring more consciousness till after the binge. Like it will be too much between the time when you get that urge to binge and you actually are binging. We want to slow that down. So that can mean taking a deep breath and getting into the body and trying to connect with that part that wants to binge and say, hey, what's going on right now? You want to binge? Like, what's going on? And that part may not trust you straight away because you haven't been there for it in that way that it's needed for a long time, if not forever. Not by fault of your own. You just weren't taught the tools to be able to be there for yourself in that way. So it's never about blaming or anything like that. You're using new tools and you're trialing them out. It's new territory. So first of all, give yourself a break, I would say. And also, if you're not giving yourself a break, give yourself a break for not giving yourself a break. So just meet yourself where you are. But yeah, being present and checking in, okay, what's going on for you? How come you're binging? And in that moment, you might still binge. That's fine. You've taken that baby step to try and connect with yourself. So every time, you always have the next opportunity or the next meal to be intuitive and step into your body. You always have the next binge eating episode to be more conscious and bring more consciousness by checking in with yourself. And it could be afterwards. Even after you've binged, I always encourage my clients to check in with themselves. And I used to do this with myself. And I'd say, hey, like, what was going on? How come you were binging? And trying to connect with that emotion. But again, it is challenging to do on your own because we have mechanisms in us that protect us from feeling pain, because sometimes some of this stuff is completely like if we don't have someone to be able to mirror to us that it's okay, then we won't feel safe enough. These parts won't feel safe enough to actually connect with us and tell us what's going on.
Yes. And really to have somebody who has done the thing before, because it can feel really, really scary to say like, okay, you're probably still going to binge for a little while. Like we have to start on the back end. Like how checking in with yourself afterwards, not beating yourself up afterwards. And then there's the stage where you learn to be present within it rather than totally checking out, which is what we use binge eating for. Like, you're there for it and you're tasting and you're feeling, and it's like, okay, who am I in this circumstance? And then perhaps you become capable of putting some space between you and the binge. And I think it's really hard to believe that that's possible unless somebody is standing in front of you saying, this is an actual process that I went through, and it takes time.
It really does, honestly. It's even so many years up until now, there's feelings and core beliefs that I have that I'm still unraveling to this day. Like, one of them is that I'm unworthy. And it doesn't mean that I always feel unworthy, but there's certain triggers that sometimes they'll trigger me into that, and I'll know that I still have a little bit of work to do. And it's like chipping away at a stone or, a version of you that you want to create. Like, all these things are leading you to that, and it's important that we work on these blockages and not see them as ways to, as things that are getting in our way, but things that are actually leading us to where we need to go and where we want to go.
Right. And I think with this, again, going back to the good, bad, right, wrong sort of perfectionist thing, and even like the self-help world tends to be the same way. Like, we're going to get there someday. But like, you couldn't have looked at the unworthiness piece if you hadn't looked at these other layers first. And if you hadn't worked your way through the bulimia and then the binge eating and then like learning to feel the feelings and the sensations in your body, like, this is your next layer. It doesn't mean that you haven't done so much already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's where journaling is great, because it shows you where you were like a year ago from now. And I wish I did that when I started, because I actually haven't. But you do realize, because you progress slowly, like, you don't become a different person overnight. If you did, that would be a bit scary, right? If you're a completely different person. So that's also why these things and these behaviors take time to shift, because that would be like a personality disorder. It would feel like, and we would lose our sense of identity. So it is important that these things take time in that way, and it's quite healthy for them to take time, and for new circuits in our brain to rewire, new connections, new behaviors.
We want that overnight shift, right? Like that, lose the 10 pounds in 10 days, or do this and you'll be done with your binge eating. Like, we want that whole lifestyle overhaul, because in general, when we're dealing with this, when we're in the muck of it, we're so miserable, and we just want like anything that is the opposite of this. But really, it is the baby steps, that feeling 1% better or 2% more understanding of what's going on. Like, that is really the sustainable thing.
Yeah, and that's where the perfectionist attitude comes in, and that's where I would look at, how come you need the results today? Like, what's important about that?
Yeah.
And I would inquire specifically as to why you need results straight away. Because I've come to the point now, and as a part of me used to always want results straight away, whether it be like personal development or to be a coach even. And yeah, we need to look at why, like for myself, the reason that I wanted it straight away was that so then I would feel worthy of it. And so I would be an expert and people would give me attention and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, just being curious about the self and why we do certain things and why we are attracting certain people, and just, having more of a curiosity about our lives as opposed to a judgment about our lives.
And curiosity, it's just so soft. It's so soft.
Yes.
We're used to being so hard.
Yeah, so good, so good. It's so challenging though at times, and I totally get that. But if we can just remind ourselves, I suppose.
Right. And now I'm sort of thinking about self-love, and as this stuff comes up for you, I mean, I get the sense that this is not any hindrance to you being able to say, I love myself. So now this piece comes up that, oh my gosh, I feel unworthy. And that's what this whole thing has been about. And you're able to look at like the coaching journey and all of this, but that doesn't mean like, oh my God, I don't love myself, right? It's like, oh, unworthiness. Like, what are you here to tell me?
Yeah, exactly. It's just another part of yourself that you get to know, I suppose, which is beautiful. It's like an unraveling of a part of you that was locked away, that didn't get a chance, like you haven't known yet. It's like a new aspect of you. And then I get to connect with that part and say, oh, okay, how come you're feeling unworthy? And like, what's going on for you? But the only way that we can do that is if we don't have any judgment for us feeling that way.
Right. Which ironically, I think that a lot of the conventional approaches are kind of judgmental. They're even when they sound empowering, like there's this positive thinking like, oh, you don't need to feel that way, or don't focus on the negative or any of this stuff. But that's just like, it's trying to put a shiny Band-Aid over all of these layers of things underneath that we are labeling as bad, even if we don't necessarily think of that. Like there, you know, you could have potentially gone the route of like, well, unworthiness is not empowering, so I'm just going to be an empowered woman. But that's not love, because this is, unworthiness is a piece of you right now that's not completely understood.
Exactly. And it's challenging because, you know, on social media and in life in general, people don't discuss the stuff that they're going through, the challenging times. And that's why I try, you know, the other day I posted a video that I was feeling unworthy, and I wanted people to hear that, because it's important that at least I'm starting to set the tone and be an example, because there's too much social media pressure to look a certain way or appear a certain way or just give the highlights. And I just don't want the world to be like that. I don't want people to see that and think that how they're feeling isn't how they're supposed to be feeling, because how you're feeling is exactly how you're supposed to be feeling. And I really want people to get that if you're feeling sad, that's how you're feeling at the moment, and just try and be with yourself in that sadness in whatever capacity you can, and just keep trying to be there and do that, and reaching out to people and following people that actually can relate to you with that. And just unfollowing people that don't make you feel good.
Yeah, totally. And I really like that, because it'd be so easy for people to look at you and be like, well, she's healed her binge eating, so she must just be happy all the time. Because I think that it's very easy to think like, oh, binge eating is the thing that's in the way. This is the problem. Once I'm over it, then I'll just be happy. I will have arrived. But you're saying like, hey, this is what human looks like. And I think it's hard too when we don't have any experience of just being able to be kind to ourselves in any sort of lightness, because it's like, oh my God, what do you mean I still have to feel sadness? Like, it's not that. You get to a point where this stuff, it moves through you because you're not resisting it. And it's not the heaviness that like sadness can feel like when you're just in resistance to it all the time.
Exactly. It's not so much that you're feeling sad, but that you have the tools to be able to navigate through that and realize that that's a human emotion, and we have those feelings for a reason. We have sadness, anger, frustration, and they matter just as much as happiness, peacefulness, and joy do. They just serve a different purpose.
Yeah, like those things are not going away. They're messages to you. They come as communication to you.
Absolutely. Don't try and push them away, because I'm telling you, it's going to come back and bite you in the bum.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so wonderful. And I love how practical you are, and how like, this is just, it's so non-fluffy, non-woo-woo, not any of this stuff. And I really appreciate the work you do so much. And I want to ask you, is there anything else? Because I feel like there are so many other areas we could go to. Is there anything else that you want to say or express, or that you wanted to touch on in the world of intuitive eating, binge eating, self-love, or any of the work that you do?
I just want to touch on just, you know, sometimes in the binge eating journey, we'll resort to, and we touched on this earlier, going back to binge eating, but also going back to when we are during the intuitive process, we'll want to go back to dieting. And I want to say that that's okay to go back to it, and it's okay to want to go back to it. Like, there's nothing wrong with trialing it out again and seeing that, having more proof that it doesn't actually work. And sometimes you need that to be able to have closure, that the dieting isn't going to be the solution to what's going on inside of you. And I've been there many times myself. I've gone back and forth with diets, and, with the media, they're always promising something new. So it's really not your fault that you're even tempted by this stuff.
Right. And as to what you were saying earlier also about the binge eating coming up again, I went through this a lot over the years, and it'll still pop up every once in a while. Like, I'll find myself overeating, and that's my little cue that like, oh, Randy, you were really taking control again. Like, you were really trying to push something that your body wasn't working for your body. And that's all it was. Like, that's just a little message, and then you move on. It's not like, oh my God, I've messed up.
Yeah, exactly. No, but Yeah, exactly. And, one thing that I do say is that, my clients ask me, do you still overeat? Like, I'm like, yeah, of course I do. Like, for example, but the difference is I overeat, but I make that choice for myself. Like, I know that I'm overeating and it becomes a choice. Like, for example, at like a Christmas gathering or something, there may be food there that I don't have all the time year round available. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to enjoy this. And if I overeat, then it's about making the choice and being willing to take responsibility for the consequences of that choice. And that's where being an adult comes into it. So you have to take responsibility for the actions you take. So if you choose to overeat, know that afterwards you probably won't feel good in your body. But have that be okay. Like, if it's worth it to you, then do it. And if sometimes you do it, and it's not conscious, then have that be okay too. Those are the repercussions. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. That's just what's going to happen.
Yes, I think this is reframing so many words that have so much heaviness to it. Like, taking responsibility isn't a like, well, you overate, so you deserve to feel bad. It's just a like, no, you chose that. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you spaced out for a minute. Like, no big deal. How does this feel? How you doing? Like, have that sort of like you're saying, conversation with yourself.
Exactly. You might need to sleep it off or, for a few hours because you're in a carb coma. Who cares? At the end of the day, I like to say that, binge eating and overeating is not the worst thing that you can be doing to yourself. There's drugs out there that you could be taking. It's not the worst thing. I know that it's not the best feeling in the world, but there are worse things that you could be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more consciousness that you bring to it too, because I think what people are afraid of is just constantly feeling out of control. But what you're saying, I believe, is that you get to a point where you're choosing. You're totally with yourself. You're like, okay, I feel what's happening, and I feel that pull, and I'm going to make this choice right now, and I'm going to understand why this is here. And it's not this like, oh my God, I'm out of control.
Yeah, exactly. And also realizing how little control we have. Like, we think we have so much control over our health, over our bodies, when really we don't have that much control over our lives. And I think that's a really big thing to admit to ourselves on an emotional level. But even if we put good foods in our bodies, or what you think is good foods, healthy foods, and then, you could still die tomorrow. You don't know. So I would say just really being with the thoughts that, I don't have, like, what am I trying to control here, and how come I'm trying to control this? Because is it controllable? Probably not. So how come you're trying to hang on to this, and inquiring further within yourself about that?
Right. And that's not even to say, like, we have choices, and it's very like we go on our trial and error journey and the feeling journey, but it's a different thing from that rigid control, or saying like life should look like this, and I'm going to try and fit it into this box and make things happen this way.
Yeah.
Totally. So the last question that I always ask on this podcast, the name of the podcast is Free Spirit Academy. And when I think of a free spirit, and this is not actually the dictionary definition, I realize, or like, I don't know if it's in the dictionary, but like you look it up and this is not necessarily what they say. But what I say when I think of a free spirit is it's just you getting to be yourself. Like 100% everything that you're capable of being flowing through you right now, that is you, free spirit.
So beautiful.
When that comes in for you, like, what do you think of when you think of a free spirit?
I think your definition is absolutely beautiful, and to feel that and have moments where I do feel that within myself is a beautiful thing, and I wish for everyone to feel that way about themselves. But my definition would be not caring, not caring in a way that other people's opinions don't affect you, but just letting yourself be you without condition, I suppose, without any fluff or any drama, just being yourself, authentically yourself. And I know that everyone says that, but to not let anyone else dictate you or tell you who you are.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for this. And if you resonated with what Melissa had to say today, I know you have a really great Facebook group, a very great and active Facebook group, and you're there in Facebook Live quite a bit. Are there any other directions that you want to point people? And obviously we'll have these links in the show notes, but for people to come find you?
No, so simply, to hop onto my Facebook community, Beyond the Binge, it's called. And, the space there is super supportive, super safe, and we encourage everyone to join and take responsibility. It's a place where you take responsibility for yourself and share what you're going through. And, it's super supportive. So hop on over.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thanks, Randy.